All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Bates Botanical Boot Camp. You're here with Austin. And today we are talking about some mid-season maintenance. Now, this is not the most fun topic because it involves maintenance, and maintenance means work in a garden. And there are some things that we should be doing or thinking about doing right now. And if you have questions on what to be doing or when to be doing it, please chime in at any time. We'll take your questions. Tyler's over here, always running that side of things, and he will take your questions. So if you have very specific questions you want to ask about a certain shrub or whatever, let us know, and I will answer it as we go. So there's Tyler.
And there's my voice.
Yep.
Comment on Zoom or Facebook with whatever you need throughout the program, and we will address it as soon as we can.
All right, so I'm going to just kind of start with some very general practices that are typical and common to do this time of year. So this year specifically in Middle Tennessee, as y'all know, it's been hot, and it's been hot very early. So one of the biggest mid-season maintenance things that we have to deal with, and it's the most important by far, and it's the most challenging thing, I think, to understand, and that's watering. Watering is certainly... it's one of those mysteries to a lot of people. It's when to do it, how much to do it, when you're overdoing it. And some people are really good about watering, which means they water all the time, but they may not necessarily need to be watering. Some people are kind of lazy about watering, and they don't get it done, and then you start to see issues pop up as this mid-season starts to come on. So I guess, first off, the general rule of thumb is that we don't necessarily have to water established shrubs, okay? If you're plants that you've planted, your trees, your shrubs, if you've planted them, say, last year or the year before, and they've really latched in and they're starting to grow, there's not all that much watering that needs to be done on established shrubs, okay? If the plant looks good and it looks green and happy and healthy, then it's generally fine. It doesn't necessarily need water. So know that, but on the flip side, if you planted shrubs or trees or really anything this spring, or even recently, then you really ought to be watering. And a nice deep soak is what we want to achieve. We don't want to just lightly water once every day. Okay, it's so much easier. It's so much better for the plant, and it's so much easier on you to water thoroughly when you do drag a hose out there to do it. Nobody likes to pull a hose out to our plants and have to water. It's just annoying. It really is. All of this mid-season maintenance stuff is fairly annoying, but it's something you got to do to make sure you get your plant latched in and growing. And then once you get that, then the maintenance is much less. So whenever you do decide to water, make sure you soak the root zone very deeply. Okay, I think I try to make it easier for people to understand how to water. And it sounds so simple to me just because I've been doing it for so long, but to a lot of people, they don't understand. You need to water right on top of the root zone with a hose directly on top. And then whenever you do that, you want to put the hose right on top of where the root zone is, and you want to fill it up to where that water is on top of the root zone. And then as it starts to run away from the roots, you got to know, if you just keep watering that, the water's just going to keep running away and away from that root zone. That water that's going out there is not doing anything for your plant. So we've got to put the hose on top, let it fill up on top of that root zone, and then take the hose off of it. Just let it run somewhere else while that is seeping in slowly. And then once that seeps in, then you put the hose back on top and do it all again. And you may do this 3 to 4 to 5 times to really soak that root zone where we want the water. And then after you do that, you can walk away, and it may be a few days later before you have to do it again. It may be a week. Maybe you never have to do it again. It depends on the plant. Certain things certainly need water more so than others, but they are generally going to tell you when they need water. They're going to look different. And the biggest key to all of this, and this is gardening all across the board, that is literally just observing your plants, giving them time every single day, if not, every other day, if you will. I'm a plant nerd, at its core. So, I'm out looking at my stuff every single day. It's just what I love to do. I know not everybody's like that. We want things to just kind of be and grow and not, as little maintenance as possible. I hear that a lot, to have low maintenance shrubs and all that. And we can certainly achieve that. And I can give you plants, and we all here can get you plants that are low maintenance. But whenever you first plant a plant, there is maintenance. I don't care what plant you're planting. It could be the most drought-resistant plant on earth. You can be planting a cactus outside. But whenever you first plant it, there are some certain things you need to do, and the watering is crucial. So make sure they stay moist whenever you first plant them in, and then as the season draws on, like now, we are observing them and looking at them and making sure that they're not turning dry on us. We want to keep them growing, okay? So there you go. Watering, it's still a hard topic. It's never easy to let people know how much and how little. It's just something you got to learn, and that goes with the observance. That goes with the looking at it. And like I said earlier, if your plant looks good, let it be. If it looks different, looks off, probably water, especially if you just planted it. On the total flip side of that, if you are overwatering a plant, you will start to see some issues too, but it happens a lot slower. Okay, so if you're underwatering a plant whenever you first plant it, you're going to see a quick response of, say, wilting, and then interior yellowing and dropping of leaves, and then after that, what you see is a brown, crispy response. That's an underwatering scenario. That happens quickly. An overwatering scenario happens much slower. A plant can be overwatered for a pretty good while and not necessarily die, but it's going to have issues. It's going to be typically spotting. You're going to see like little black spots on it or brown rings. There's going to be some sort of telltale sign of an overwatering scenario based on what the leaves look like. And it's not like a wilting. It's not a physical response. It's actually just being taken up, and you're starting to see all these fungal issues and just bad things going on. But that, like I said, that happens much slower. So if you're starting to see those things, ease back on the watering. You don't necessarily have to do it as much. Keep your plant clean and green, and it's just gonna do better for you. So
another place to look for issues would be at the base of the plant. Root rot is very common if you got a plant that is being overwatered.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually one of our first questions that was asked. How do you look at a plant and tell if it's over or underwatered? So there's some tips there. Yeah,
and like I addressed earlier, the underwatering it always starts with wilting for the most part. Now look, I'm talking about more or less leafy plants, conifers, cone-bearing plants, which are going to be needled evergreens typically, or fan-shaped evergreens. Arborvitae is a common, a number of cypresses, deodar cedars. Junipers, all of those are a little bit different. They don't present a wilt like other plants do that have like leaves, more leafy things. So the conifers are a little bit different. They're a little bit trickier to kind of tell. Now, once they latch in, they pretty much don't necessarily need added water as the seasons go on. But on the first season, you want to kind of keep them moist through the summer. Just that's a general rule of thumb.
Go ahead. I have lost one of my conifers that I did plant. I believe I planted it at the beginning of June, which is right when this heat wave kicked off. And even though I did significantly water it every other day, I was doing, some longer soaks with the hose, still I lost a plant. Now, this is during these extreme hot periods where it is really hard to keep moisture in the soil because the dirt itself, because it's being so dry, is actually heating up everything else around it. There's no water in it to help absorb the impact of those temperatures. So just be mindful of that when we get super hot.
Yeah. But then, like I was saying, with the leafy things, they're going to present a wilt first. And it's mainly from the topmost growth. So the water obviously comes up the plant. And when it's water stressed, it can't get to the very tops of the plants. What happens after that is you see a wilt mainly from the top. That's going to be your first sign of an underwatering event. The second sign is going to be interior yellowing and then dropping of leaves. So this is very common for underwatered plants mainly, specifically this time of year, hydrangeas and crepe myrtles. Both of those, it's common for us to talk about that right now because they're in bloom. That's how this kind of business works around here. If it's blooming around town, we're selling it here, obviously, because you're seeing it around, they're pretty, and you want one. So a lot of people want hydrangeas right now. A lot of people want crepe myrtle. So they're planting them this time of year in the dead of the summer, which is when they bloom. This is obviously the most stressful time for a plant to be planted because it's most stressful on the plant and it's the most stressful on you because it is so hot and so dry. You got to water a lot. So if you're seeing that if you're planting hydrangeas or crepe myrtles, and you're starting to see interior yellowing and dropping of leaves, that's an underwatered scenario. So, and hydrangeas will wilt. They will wilt really heavy on you. If you ever see that, go out and soak them. You give it about 30, 45 minutes later, and they will be right back up and perky. So just be mindful of that. And like I was saying, with an overwatered scenario, you're going to see typical spotting on leaves. You're going to see a general yellow cast over the whole plant. They're just not going to look right. They're not going to look just good and happy. So you kind of just have to get to know your plants and grow them every year and look at them and play with them. And you have to learn to kill a plant before you know how to grow one, is a kind of a common term we use around here. And it's true. I'm no different. I've killed a number of plants. Sometimes I kill them on purpose. Just I don't want them anymore. Or sometimes I forget about something and things happen. I mean, I understand why the plant died, but sometimes that's just how it is, So, but learning to once you feel it out, you start to learn how to keep them growing. And the maintenance side of it, the doing this stuff before you start to see issues is always better than once you have the issues and trying to deal with them after that. So there you go. That's my spiel on watering. That's a deep topic. We could go into that forever, but that's something that we obviously have to be doing if you've planted new stuff. So, all right.
If you'd like additional watering advice, as well as some devices or types of watering methods, I'd recommend you check out our webinar, How to Water Your Landscape. It's on YouTube on our Bates Nursery channel.
There you go. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about some fertilizing. And this is probably going to be about the last time we're going to fertilize. This is also with pruning, which I'm going to get to in a second. But fertilizing, it's never a bad idea to add organic matter back to your soil, okay? So, like, when to do it isn't necessarily totally crucial, but it kind of is in a way. This is probably going to be the last time we're going to decide to actually fertilize our plants. And for established shrubs and trees that are like in your yard, they don't necessarily need fertilizer, y'all. If they look good, let them be. But say like our garden plants, our vegetable garden plants, this is a good time to go ahead and get them one more boost of a good fertilizer to get them through the rest of this season and keep them producing, fruit for you as long as you can. If you are going to fertilize trees or shrubs, say they're newly planted, and you want to kind of get them some organic matter, now is kind of the good time to do it. We don't want to push. We're going to push some growth right now for this last kind of flush of the season, and then we're going to let those plants just kind of chill after that. And we're not necessarily going to fertilize them in the fall or anything. But right now is a good time to go ahead and drop some fertilizer on the plants, or just do a simple top dressing of compost just to add organic material back to the soil. And that's going to help for longevity. We have a compost product here we sell. It comes in bags. It's called Supernatural. It's a very nutrient-rich mix that's very easy to just top dress around the top of plants. And like I said, this just adds organic matter. It adds a little bit of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, all those the big three numbers that you want in the garden. And it just creates a nutrient-rich environment. And this isn't just for this season's plants, but this is for next season's plants and the years after that. And just keep on adding that stuff and helping out your soil and make it nice and productive. This is a good time to be doing that. And then, let's see. Yeah, fertilizing, top dressing. After you fertilize, make sure you water it in really well. It's really hot, so we don't want, if you're using, anything synthetic, fertilizers that are a little bit heavier nitrogen or a little bit just stouter in general, you need to make sure you water that in really well, so it's available to the plants, and they'll greatly benefit from that. All right, so another very big topic with the mid-season maintenance, which nobody wants to hear, but you have to do it, and it's weeding. Y'all, we got to weed. It's annoying. It's the biggest pain that we have to deal with in Middle Tennessee, or really anywhere. All gardeners have to deal with weeds, but here in our area, we really have a lot of weeds. And what happened with us this year is we turned very hot very quickly. We had an extreme amount of heat, and we didn't have a ton of weed growth. It really wasn't that bad. I know this because I'm a chronic weeder. I weed constantly in my beds. And I noticed I went through a little lull there when we didn't have any rain and we had those huge temperatures. I didn't have a ton of weed growth. Well, what happened? Got a lot of rain in a quick period. In a week's time, we got a very good amount of rainfall, at least at my house anyway. And the weeds had jumped. And when I say jump, they have jumped. And it is no joke. Weeds are out. Grass weeds specifically, which are horrible. I prefer broadleaf weeds any day over grass. But a lot of crabgrass, different types of grass gets Bermuda, really jumps when it gets hot. All of that is really just annoying to deal with. But still, the best method to weeding your garden is to literally just pull your weeds. Now, I'm not saying that I'm just not 100% against Roundup or anything, because I'm not. I use my Roundup very specifically to what I need to be spraying, and it's also away from my plants. Y'all have to know, when you spray Roundup, you do not want that wand up high at all. You want it right on the dirt, right on top of that weed you were spraying at an extreme low pressure in your tank. You do not want a high pressure blast of Roundup if you're anywhere around your ornamental plants. Drift is a thing, and drift just means when taking small little droplets of Roundup and putting them on your shrubs or plants or ornamentals, annuals, whatever it may be, and you're going to see significant damage because of that. So if you are going to choose the Roundup, which is a very effective method, it really is, it works well, but you just got to be careful with it. It's a dangerous product to plants and for us. It's not good for you to be inhaling it at all. If you can wear a mask while you're doing it. Do it on a very...
And gloves.
Don't get it on yourself if you can help it, and do it on a mild day. So when I say that, I mean like not a lot of wind. We don't want a lot of wind going on to carry those droplets anywhere. But like I said, the use of Roundup can be very effective if you need it.
And if you use a sprayer, make sure that that is the only sprayer that you use Roundup with, and you do not use it, even rinsing it out, with any other chemical.
Negative. Yes, that's a very good point, Tyler. You need to, right when you get that Roundup sprayer and you're going to just use Roundup for it, get you a Sharpie and write Roundup only or herbicide only as the only product you're ever going to use in that tank ever. Don't ever mix anything else with it. The droplets of Roundup can stay in a sprayer for an extremely long amount of time, and they can really cause problems. So do not be mixing your tanks up, okay? I've got 3 different sprayers at my house. One's for herbicide, one for insecticide, one for fungicide. I don't have to use them all the time or anything, but if I ever do, I have a tank specific for what I'm spraying. So know that. That's a very, very good point.
Well, we have a couple of questions here that have been piling up. One is Encore Azalea dark brown on the backside. Too much water?
Dark brown on the backside. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming backside means that they're probably up against a wall or something, maybe, since you're calling it a backside.
Feel free to follow up with that.
Yeah, feel free to follow up. But it's probably a light issue. I don't know how old the plants are. But it's weird. If a plant is underwatered, you're going to see a response throughout the whole plant. It's not going to be just on like one side of it. It's not going to be like if a hydrangea is underwatered, you're not going to see like one limb or 2 limbs like go wilty and the rest of the plant not. It's a total plant response. You're going to see wilting across the whole board. So if you're seeing a response on just one side of the plant, typically that's going to be a light issue. Either that plant's not getting enough light to produce, nice green foliage, or you've got an insect problem that's happening, and it's within the plant and you're not knowing it or whatever, and it's starting to spread. That could be an issue. Or some sort of fungal pathogen that's happening, that's starting in one part of the plant that's starting to spread a little bit. So there's a number of different things this could be. So it'd be helpful for me if I could see some pics or something to help you out a little bit better on that. Because
out in the open, but front is green and healthy.
Do what?
Out in the open, but the front is green and healthy.
Okay. Well, we do need to look. You need to look closer, maybe, for, like I said, an insect pest, because that's kind of how insects roll. They start in one spot and then they spread around. There's azalea lace bugs. Are a very common issue for azaleas, and they can present in a nasty way. You might look at the plant and see if it's physically broken. Sometimes dogs or animals or birds even can come in and try to make nests, and stems can break. I literally just break a little bit and you don't notice it, and then that part of the plant starts to brown, and it'll succumb after that. So could be a number of things, but like I said, I would like to see it, and hopefully we can help you out there. So
take a picture of the entire plant, and then closer up, and then take a picture of the leaves, so we can kind of see holistically what's going on with it. You're free to email it to info@batesnursery.com. There's another question, same person, but not as related. Best way to get wild violets out?
Wild violets are the worst. They are literally the worst. I think 2,4-D is effective on wild violets, but they're persistent, okay? It's not an end-all solution to just spray once and you're done, unfortunately. Hand removal before they go to flower and seed is really a good way to do it, but for the most part, I know if you got one wild violet, you've got 100, and it's not just an easy little task to get rid of those. So like I said, I do believe that's old school herbicide 2,4-D does take care of the wild violets, but like I said, they are persistent little weeds. It's not a one-time you're done type of scenario. So you got to keep on that anytime you see them, anytime you can get them young, and anytime you can get them before they flower. This is where I was going to go with my weeding talk, and that's getting weeds out before they go to seed, okay? That's, one single weed can produce hundreds upon hundreds of seeds. So not that all those seeds would ever germinate, but, one going to 10 is not fun. One going to 50 is certainly not fun, because then you got to pull 50 instead of one. So if you can ever get to these weeds before they go to flower, that is certainly crucial. Do that now, because there are a ton of weeds that are wanting to go to flower and then to set seed right now. They just are. So if you haven't been in your beds in a while, or if you haven't gotten in your veggie garden to kind of look around and weed, spend some time out there. Do it, whenever it's early in the morning if you're a morning person, or if you prefer it at night whenever it's starting to cool down and there's some shade out there. Go out there and start hoeing around the garden. I've got a hoe that I just literally keep at the garden, just, right up next to a fence post. And every Monday is my day off, so I'll go out and I'll spend about 30 to 45 to an hour sometimes just using my hoe and hoeing around the garden and getting those weeds turned up. You don't have to physically remove them. You can literally just hoe them and then turn them over on top of the ground, let the roots be exposed to the air in the sunlight, and they'll just cook in this summer sun. So that's just keeping, I kind of like to keep green matter in the soil if I can. So like I said, I don't actually remove the weeds. I just let them lay on top and let the sun just kind of cook them, and then they just kind of melt back into the earth, and it's just part of it. It's just part of nature. So doing that once a week, if you can help it, or even more if you can, like I said, this is not a fun webinar. This is maintenance. This is work. It's not fun for me to go out there and hoe that garden every week, but I tell you what, I've got a very clean garden this year. The weeds are out of it, and the plants are much happier because of it. If other plants don't have to compete with those weeds, you get bigger, happier, bushy plants that have less pest issues, which is really another crucial thing, because pests love weeds just as much as they love our plants, y'all. So the more weeds you have in a garden, the more bugs you're going to have in general. We don't want bugs. They mess a lot of things up. So keeping it clean is the way to go. And like I said earlier, hand weeding is the most annoying, but also the most effective.
Yes. And often, as well as preventing those weeds from becoming super established, because once they get those first few batches of seed, you're going to be seeing more weeds pop up. And then it just kind of multiplies your battles. So I'm saying, man, it happens quick. It's the same way with pests. Checking, this is another topic I was going to talk about. We may as well go into it, and it's checking for pests. If one pest turns into 100 really, really quickly, these things can happen. So going out to your plants, looking at them. If you're going to, I've said this in multiple webinars before, and I say this all the time, is you're going to see damage to the plants before you're actually going to see the insects. Okay, so, and I know y'all don't necessarily know what insects you're looking for. We deal with it all the time, so I know the damage before. I can look at a plant and see the damage, and I can probably tell you what pest is on it without ever even seeing a pest, just based on the damage of the plant. But for you guys that are, don't necessarily know what you're looking for damage, holes in leaves, a general white cast over plant. White is typical of insects. So if you ever see green leaves that look whitish, generally there's going to be an insect pest there. Even if you can't see it, there's sometimes some insects are too small for you to even see, but they're there. Keeping an eye on that, because like I said, one can turn to 100, and then 100 can turn into 1,000 real quick with a lot of different bugs. So be mindful of that. And this also goes all the way back to what I was talking about, and that's just observing your plants, keeping an eye on them, checking them,
Make sure nothing gets out of hand. You can stop something pretty quickly if you catch it quick. If you don't, then things get bad. So there you go. Insects, no fun. Don't want to have to deal with that. All right, let's switch over real quick to pruning. And not a ton of pruning to be done right now. Most of our deciduous plants that lose their leaves over the winter and go dormant, most of those type plants, we are going to just wait until they do that, until they drop their leaves and it's wintertime. Then we're going to give them a haircut. This is not 100% across the board with everything, but probably 95% of deciduous plants, they're going to be cut back over the wintertime. So we're not going to do that now. But there are a couple of things that we can prune now, and this is going to be mainly your hedgy, evergreen, leafy plants. So let's say hollies. You got holly on the front of your home. You've got yews. When I say yew, yew, it's another just kind of hedgy shrub. Say you've got laurels, which a lot of people have laurels out there, big leafy evergreen that are typical. These are all typical like foundation type plants for your home. Those are probably the three most common. And boxwood as well. I'm not going to throw in boxwood too much because it's not really the time to prune boxwood all that much. They're much slower growers. But the other ones that I talked about, they have a way of really growing in the spring. Okay, so they can kind of get out of their bounds a little bit and get a little hairy, get a little stretchy. Got some limbs going out tall, especially with holly. Holly really, really shoots, and they may have a stem that goes way up, and the shrub is down here, and you got stems that are way up here. So now is an excellent time to go out there and with established shrubs, get your hedge pruners. They can be gas powered, they can be electric. You can do it by hand if you wish. Any way you want to do it, let's go ahead and get those tidied back up. So if you have hollies that are in a square, perfect hedge, let's go ahead and get those back to size. It doesn't necessarily matter where you do it at. These plants, especially like I said, if they're not established, if this is a first season planting, let them alone. Let them just kind of grow and just deal with the wild hairs for now, because we just really want to make sure we have plenty of green so they're feeding both top and bottoms all getting fed. They're just going to be healthy. Let those be. But if they're established shrubs on your home, now's a really good time to go in and just clean them up. What you are going to see is after you prune them, there's going to be probably a 3-week lull where you don't see anything, and then they're going to reshoot. They have enough time in the season to reshoot some new leaves. And typically whenever they do that, if we do it this time of year, it's not going to be like a spring response where they just shoot crazy up or whatever. They're just going to kind of leaf back out a little bit tighter. So you're going to get that new growth flush again, and it's going to have time to harden off for the rest of the summer, so the leaves get strong enough to handle the cold weather that will be coming at some point, and they're going to harden off and be ready to take that winter that we're going to have at some point. So yeah, pruning larger shrubs, leafy evergreens, now is certainly a good time to go ahead and get that done. It's a hot job. It's annoying. It's not fun to do. Be very careful with your gas-powered trimmers or your electric trimmers whenever you're doing that. There's a lot of landscapers out here that are missing half a finger because they got a little wild with those. So just be very careful with that. Remove all your trimmings. Be clean with anything in gardening. Being clean is just really a better way to do it. Don't leave your trimmings down around the bottom of the shrub. It just adds for pests or fungus or something to grow on that we just don't want. So clean it up whenever you're all done, and you'll have tidier looking shrubs, because most of the time our shrubs really, like I said, they shoot in the spring and they've got some wild hairs we need to take care of. So get those back trimmed up, and they'll be good for the wintertime. So,
and speaking of cleanliness, to be able to work smarter, not harder, when you are doing these activities in your garden, consider some things like kneeling pads or a cart that you could pull with you that you could also sit on that has all your tools with you. Having a tarp that you could bring around, like a small little canvas cloth or something that could catch those trimmings, and then you could easily bundle those up and drag them off either to the curb or to your compost pile. And then on the composting note, make sure that you're not adding any fungally, icky, or diseased limbs or cuttings or anything like that to your compost.
Very good point. Yeah, we don't want any. We want to be clean in that compost, that's for sure. Don't want to present anything in there.
We got a question. Another question. Azaleas pruned after flowering, but straight growth since. Is it okay to trim that back now?
That's kind of up to you. You can. I kind of like to because they do azaleas. It was, by the way, it's a good time for you to do that. After they bloom is when we want to prune azaleas. So good job doing that. And then what you see is that response. So they all jump really quickly. And they've got some sporadic growth. Some are probably bigger than others. And yes, if you're going to do that, let's go ahead and do it now. What we don't want to do is cut too late in the season to where we lose a lot of our flower buds, because azaleas are one of those specific ones. That's why I didn't mention. That's why I said like 95% of plants. Azalea's not one of them. We don't want to trim those back too late because then you get rid of a lot of flower power for the spring. We want to keep a lot of those buds on those stems for the spring show. But what you can do is get them back uniform. So pick a spot on the shrub where you want them to be size-wise, and then take every stem at that size all the way around the plant. What you do when you do this is you create a much tighter shrub. So then next spring, you get a really tight, bushy flower show. You don't get a lot of sporadic blooms going up. They'll bloom either way, but I kind of like an azalea that is super tight and all those blooms are just really close to one another. It adds for the nicest show you can get. So yes, good question. Let's just go ahead and get it back uniform. Don't go nuts on it. Don't go too far, but just pick a spot where you want it, trim everything back to there, and you should be good.
Last year, I pruned my azaleas heavily after blooming as they were really leggy and sparse. I took them back quite a bit, quite severely. I would say 2/3 back. It took them almost the entire rest of the year to start putting out new growth until they went kind of dormant for the winter. And then this year, they're probably close to about half the size they were. So they will work their way back, but I'm wanting them to get big again. So be mindful of, as it's growing, where that size you want to keep it at is, and then you can maintain it from there.
Yeah, it's mainly a tip prune type of scenario, not a full, deep, heavy prune or anything. It's more just taking those tips back a little bit. So while we're on the topic of that, let's talk about deadheading. We all know what deadheading is for the most part, and that's just removing spent blooms. And when I say spent blooms, that's literally just a plant that's bloomed and the flowers are faded and done. I got a question yesterday, actually, on an email from a person that was wondering what to do with their oak leaf hydrangea, for instance. It was bloomed and now all the blooms are brown. And it's just kind of, some people like the spent blooms on a shrub. It's not for me. I like to keep it a little bit cleaner. So if you've got flowering plants that have finished up and that are done, oak leaf hydrangea being one, and you are tired of seeing those blooms, simply cut them off. It's not hard at all. Just take the blooms off, throw them away, put them in your compost as long as they're clean. But yeah, we need to be deadheading. We can talk about this also with annuals. So if you're growing annuals in, containers, mixed containers, in the ground, or say hanging baskets specifically too, hanging baskets are probably starting to get a little tired at this point. We got hot quickly for hanging baskets, and you've been having to water them, I'm sure, a lot. Sometimes it's good practice with your annuals if they're starting to get leggy and they're not blooming a lot anymore. They're just trying to set a lot of seed. That's the thing, y'all. Whenever plants finish a really heavy bloom cycle, what do? They produce their seeds. That's the whole point for flowers. It's the whole point for plants in general, is to reproduce. They need seeds for that. Whenever plants go to seed after a heavy flower, they don't want to bloom a ton more. They put more energy towards, making those seeds strong and then dispersing them. So if you have hanging baskets or annuals in general that are getting leggy and they're not blooming all that much anymore, let's give them a pretty good cutback. I mean, like literally in half or even more. I know it's hard to do that because a lot of them are still blooming. They're just not blooming as much. If you go ahead and remove a lot of those leaves and get them back in check and tighten them up a little bit, they will, almost all of them, resend out leaves and then resend out another flower show. So I just did this with wave petunias. If you're not familiar with wave petunias, they are typically put in hanging baskets and they will spill out the sides and keep cascading. If you put them in the ground, they will run across the ground. So petunias are my favorite by far. I use petunias in amongst my boxwoods that I have out in the front bed. I use a lot of them. And just 2 weeks ago, I noticed a lot of seed and minimal flower production, just not a lot showing. They were still colorful, but just not as much as I wanted. So I went into each one of them and I took all those leggy stems back. And like I said, I took them from a plant that was, say, this big. I took them down to a plant that was like this big, like literally in the ground, just a round plant, mainly just the crown of the plant. And then what I see 2 weeks later, I just noticed this morning, I've got beautiful foliage, beautiful flowers that are coming back on the petunias, and really, really showy. So if you're starting to see that, this is a good time to maintain those and get them back in check and let them have more longevity for the rest of the fall. We really want our annuals to go. Whenever you buy your annuals in the spring, you certainly you expect, flowers from spring all the way to frost, and we want that. But to actually achieve that in Middle Tennessee and get a good looking plant until then, you tend to need to cut on your annuals. So don't be scared to. They look like delicate little flowers, but don't worry. Go ahead and give them a cut. They will releaf and then rebloom. So let's go ahead and do that. And also fertilize your annuals. Now's another good time. We can go ahead and get some annuals. Like I said, they're using up a lot of nutrient down in the soil, especially if you have them in pots. Let's go ahead and give them another boost of some fertilizer and keep them growing until frost.
Austin, would you recommend something like Espoma Garden Tone for that, or just a general even-numbered fertilizer?
Even-numbered fertilizer, yeah. It just kind of depends. For the annuals, for longevity with shrubs and trees, using organics is certainly recommended because of the beneficial mycorrhiza and other beneficial micronutrients and those things that we don't think about in fertilizers all that much, but that are in there. So with shrubs and trees, and perennials, say, that are long-lived type plants that we want to keep going, organics are certainly the way to go on that. But when it comes to annuals, this is just a very quick one-season planting. So we kind of want to boost as much as we can, with these plants, because they are such a one-season, short-lived plant. We want as much, bang for our buck as we can get. So using synthetic fertilizers is to me more recommended for annuals rather than using a little bit weaker organics. Organics are a little bit weak. They have smaller numbers in their fertilizer labels. With organics, one of my favorites is a product we sell here that's called like premium bedding food. And that's for bedding plants, which are typically your annuals. And it's got a nice nitrogen content. I believe it's like a 9%, 7 or 9% nitrogen, which is going to keep that green growing. That's what the first number is for. And then that middle number is a 22% phosphorus, which is your middle number, which is mainly going to be your number for root development and flower production, which is what you want for annuals. So, and it's also got a third number that I think is like at 10, which is a 10% potassium, which is potassium just kind of keeps everything running right. Make sure your plant stays healthy, enzymes and things, all those, deep things that plants do. It keeps that functioning properly. So that, like I said, it's like a 7-22-10 or something like that. That's a pretty good fertilizer. One of my favorites. I can put those in pots for my annuals, and I can just shake that around the ground, around the root zone of my plants, and know that it's leaching down in and the plants are using it. So to answer your question, Tyler, I'm more of a synthetic guy when it comes to my annuals, and organic when it comes to longer-lived plants. So there you go.
Great. Do you cut bee balm back into leaves or just deadhead it?
That kind of depends on what your bee balm looks like. If I know what bee balm typically looks like, it's long, it's tall, it's leggy, it's probably getting stringy. Certainly you can deadhead, that's fine. But if you want to get them back in check a little bit, one good thing about bee balm is that it is an excellent regrower. So we grow plants here all the time, obviously, but if we have plants that stay here a little bit too long in a little 1-gallon container or whatnot, they get tall and leggy as well, and we got to kind of keep them clean and looking good. The thing I've noticed about bee balm, I've known for a long time, is that if it gets up tall, you can literally cut it to the dirt, and you're going to see new sprouts come, and they're going to refill that 1-gallon container. It's almost the best practice for us on our end to do that. Just go ahead and get rid of all that old foliage and let new stuff reemerge. Bee balm is excellent at doing this, so if you do want to take it back pretty far, you certainly can. With bee balm, because it has such a good response. And it's just kind of nice to do that with plants, giving them just kind of a restart. Every once in a while, you'll see once they restart, you might see a rebloom on it pretty heavy. So if you want to keep the foliage up, and you like it how it looks and its height and everything else and the foliage is still clean, then just deadhead and just leave it how it is. But if you feel like, he's getting a little gangly, or maybe it's got a little powdery mildew on it, or, insect pests are getting on it, whatever, giving it a nice haircut, cutting it in half, or even cutting it to the ground, you're not going to hurt bee balm. It's going to come right back. So good question. And yeah, that's the way to deal with bee balm. It's more or less a weed around here. I mean, that thing takes off.
Yes, I've got some bee balm too that's looking a little tired, but the hummingbirds are still having their fill off of it. But I might try pruning some of that back as well.
Yep.
Should I cut back my coleus?
Coleus?
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. So with coleus, this is kind of more of a spring maintenance thing. If you would have, I don't know what your coleus looks like, but I can guess if you never have pruned it before, what you get with coleus is typically a pretty tall, one stem type plant that isn't necessarily as full as you would want to be. Now, I'm sure it has sent out some side shoots and made it a little bit bushier. But a lot of times coleus, if you don't cut them early in the season, coleus is one of those plants that really, really loves it whenever you, or we love it actually, whenever you top out the main stem of the plant. If you do this right when you buy them and just go ahead and pinch the top out, what you see is that you'll get young branching from all around the stem, so multiple stems coming out, and it'll create later in the season a much shorter, bushier plant, but it looks a lot better. It just looks more full. Whenever they do decide to flower, they have a lot of flower power on each one of those stems, so you get this really pretty plant. But if you want to cut back coleus now, certainly. Coleus is a vigorous annual that is just a grower, man. I mean, it just really is. So if you need to prune it, most definitely do that. Go to each. So with you're going to pinch out the tops of them. So with every stem, no matter how many you have, I don't know how many you've got, but if you've got, say, 4 or 5 main stems, take them all back to the same size, if you will. So pick a spot, like I talked about earlier with shrubs. Pick a spot you want them to be at, and then prune to the next 2 leaves. There's going to be 2 leaves that come off that main stem. You want to prune to those leaves. So pinch out right above the leaves, and then you'll have new stems come from each one of those little, what we call crotch angles. Where the leaves hit the stem, in between that is where you're going to get growth. So yes, prune them up and you'll have a bushier plant all the way until frost, and you just get some new clean foliage. It just looks better. So things are just like Tyler said. I mean, things are just starting to get a little tired. Like I said, we've had a hot year and horrible conditions, no rain. So things are a little bit tired a little bit early. So anytime we can clean those back up and get a fresh regrowth, it's just good for the plant. It's also good for us. It just looks a lot better.
Speaking of tired a little bit early, my oak leaf hydrangea blooms have kind of just dried up. Mm-hmm. Do you think that it's going to put out any more growth and bloom again? Or do you think something needs to happen to encourage that?
If you deadhead, if you go ahead and get them pruned back where you need to, get the blooms away from there so it's not trying to put any energy towards seed or anything, you might see a response, which will probably just be leaves. You rarely get a rebloom with oak leaf hydrangea. You might have one sporadic one here or there, but it's not going to be like a show. So go ahead and take it back, like we talked about earlier, where you want it to be, and get rid of those blooms, and you'll see new leaf emergence, and then that'll just be probably what you're going to get for the rest of the season. So,
but the buds for the next year have not necessarily formed yet.
No, they haven't necessarily formed yet, and it's fine to just go ahead and prune them now. They have plenty of time to reshoot, stem leaves and stems, and then produce flower buds off that for the show next season. So, yeah, go ahead and get that done. All right, we're working through this. Really, I feel like I've only got one other thing to talk about, and that's going to be harvesting. This is specific to vegetable gardening or fruit gardening. Tyler brought in a lovely little dish this morning, some little peach, what do you call them? Peach bars. Peach bars.
It's just kind of a crust in the bottom, peach layer in the middle, crust on the top.
I had one. They were fantastic, and they came from his peach tree, which is a lovely little specimen he has in his backyard, and the peaches finished up really nicely this year, and he made some food out of it. So harvesting is something we need to talk about, and getting out in the garden and looking and harvesting. So don't let plants get out of bounds on you, okay? There's a few plants that are specific to this, and that's going to be your cucumbers, zucchini, squash, and okra. 4 of those will literally run away from you and get way too big, way too quick if you don't harvest. So you're going to have to be out in the garden almost every single day whenever these plants start to fruit. Not even joking. One zucchini plant, one fruit that's this long, one day you come out the next day, it's this long. And then they're not all that good to eat. Most fruits are much better to eat whenever they're young and tender. Okra is very specific to this. I've had a lot of people talk to me about okra this year. We really want to pick okra when it is about 3 to 4 inches long, and that's it. You want them small. They taste the best when they're that way. They pickle up really, really well, and they're less slimy, and they're also less fibrous. If you've ever grown okra, and if you let them get past that 3 to 4 inch mark, they'll turn to 7 inches, seems like overnight. And then you've got this really long okra that's very fibrous. It's really hard to even bite into. They're just simply not good. Okay, so stay up on your harvesting when it comes to those specific plants. Cucumbers are the same way. Zucchini, same way. Go out there and check those things. Zucchini and cucumbers have a real good way about hiding, and you don't see them. And you really got to get in there and look. Peel those leaves back, get off in there and look, because if they hide for a day, like I said, they'll get too big, and then they're really hard to do anything with. So keeping up on your harvesting. Oh, another one I'm having to deal with right now, just literally my least favorite thing to pick, I'm pretty sure, of any fruit or vegetable that I've ever harvested, and that is green beans. I got 3 rows of green beans. I did it to myself. I don't know why, but green beans are coming in, and they come in hot and heavy. So like I said, beans are another one. They come in a perfect size one day, and you decide, I'm going to let it go another day. I don't feel like picking it. I don't have anything to put it in, whatever. And then the next day, you got a bean that's real big. Beans aren't necessarily that bad whenever they're big. You can get them a pretty big green bean, and they're still pretty good after you cook them, so not that big of a deal. But they come on quick, and they come on heavy, so go out there and make sure you're going out and picking them green beans, even though they are the worst thing to pick on earth. You got to get down. They're so low and bushy, and they hide so well. I know as a kid, we used to have to double pick our rows, and that would be me and my little brother going out. I'd walk down at first, and then he'd come behind me, and then we'd start it all over again. Dad'd be like, oh, y'all definitely missed some beans, and there he'd go in there and find a bean that we missed. We'd have to go back and pick that row again, me and him both walking down and re-picking. So really look for them beans, because they can hide, and they come on. But boy, they're a tasty treat. We picked a whole mess of them last night. Me and my kids and my wife were out there, and we got a whole mess of green beans, and I think we're going to eat them tonight. So nothing better than harvesting your own fruit. Grow as much food as you can, y'all. Get it going, get it growing. Tomatoes are coming in. They're not near as bad when it comes to picking. They're actually really fun to pick. We all love growing tomatoes. It's probably number one favorite garden plant out there, and they're starting to come in. I noticed a lot of red on mine. I'm sure y'all are seeing the same thing. So not that big of a deal to leave your tomatoes on an extra day if they are ripe. Do know you run the risk of, say, a bird or a squirrel getting those fruits. So if you do have a big bird population, or you've got a big squirrel problem, they like the fruit whenever it's ripe, just like we do. So they're going to let it get perfectly ripe, and then they're going to come in and just either snatch it or peck at it on the vine. Either way. So if you're a little nervous about them getting your fruits, harvest your tomatoes a day or two early. They will ripen just as well on your kitchen counter as they would on the vine. So it is literally the same. They don't need sunlight or anything whenever they're in that ripening stage. Ripening, y'all, literally just means rotting. Okay, it's just that it's at the right stage to eat. It's before it's after it's green and before it's rotten and leaking juice and nasty. In between that stage is where we eat it. So all plants will eventually, or all fruit will eventually rot. So if you need to bring them, like I said, because you have a squirrel problem or whatever, harvest those fruits a little bit early when they're showing some red color, and but not totally ripe. You can just tell. Bring them in your home and let them finish ripening for a couple days, 2 or 3 days inside your house, and you'll get a perfectly good fruit, just like it would ripen on the vine. So don't be scared to do that. Get them before the animals do, because that's the most annoying. So there you go. Harvest. It's time to harvest. Like I said, it's so much fun to harvest fruit and then eat it. My wife's been making pickles this year, and they are phenomenal. The cucumber crop this year has been phenomenal. So grow it, y'all. What you got, Tyler?
Oh, nothing. I'm just saying, if you have questions, now's the time to get them in. We're approaching the end of the webinar. We're super happy to be able to give you some tips and advice today, and also share some of our own gardening stories, as we are also doing the same thing this time of year.
That's right.
The same thing. And
we all have to do it.
Yep. I mean, I had limbs on my peach tree break because there was so much fruit set this year, and I have currently 3 or 4 propped up with boards right now. The whole tree looks bent over. It looks crazy. It's like, oh, get these things off of me. Well, I'm waiting for them to ripen up and for the fruit to color up enough. And then I'm also trying not to be inundated all at once with hundreds of peaches.
Yeah.
And this is just on one tree. So,
sometimes sometimes the plants dictate your maintenance, I guess.
Very true.
Very true. Because every year's different.
Yes. One of the cool things is, as you continue with your knowledge and learning, you'll see when things ripen up throughout the year. Like, one of the first things for me is strawberries. And then as that comes in, and I'm a big berry fruit grower, so after strawberries, then the blackberries come in, and then right around then, blueberries also start showing up. And then after that, the bigger fruit that's on the trees. I do have a plum that kind of fruits a little earlier too. So, yeah. But you'll get this cadence and this rhythm, and you'll be like, well, okay, this needs attention now. Okay, now I'm got to move on to this because I know in about 2 weeks that this is going to be here, and that so. It's important to do that. It's important, like Austin said, observation, super key. Even if you just want to stroll and enjoy the beauty of your garden, that's kind of one of the benefits of this observation period. Mm-hmm. And also in the morning, either before you leave for work, do the rest of the activities for your day, or in the evening. Either time works, as long as that sun isn't torturing us like it has been.
Yeah. So
we got a question here. Go ahead.
What? Go ahead.
I planted Spanish lavender this year. It is getting brown branches, maybe too much water. Can I transplant them now and put some pebbles underneath for draining?
You can if you want. You can move anything at any time. You just got to be good about the water. And right now is not necessarily an ideal time to be transplanting things. I will just go ahead and say that. Not necessarily. Now, lavender is a very drought tolerant plant, and it's okay to be on the dry side, most definitely, with lavender. So it's not the worst plant on earth to be moving right now, but in general rule of thumb, we're not really going to be trying to transplant things too much right now because even with lavender, like I was saying earlier, with a plant that you move or a plant that you just plant now, right when you plant it, you got to make sure it stays moist so it can latch in and find its own water eventually. So you're going to have to be mindful of that. And then adding your rock, like you were talking about, some pebbles to add for drainage. If you're seeing an area that's not draining well, lavender is certainly not the plant we want to use for that. So I don't know how far gone it is. I don't know how brown it is, whether it's even worth it or not. Sometimes giving it I don't know. If it is in a poorly drained, scenario, then lavender will not do well. So if you feel like that's going on, then I say better to move it now than not at all, and then it just rot away. So yeah, like I said, you can do it. Just make sure when you first move it, you keep it adequately moist, and then just kind of observe it and watch it how it goes from there. I'm not saying it's just going to be great for you. But like I said, if it's sitting there rotting in its hole and it's just turning bad anyway, then hey, why not? Go ahead and get it done and see if you can turn it around before it's too late. So there you go. Old lavender.
We got another question on Facebook. Soaker hose, good or not so much?
Depends. It really depends on when it comes to watering, I like to know how much water that plant is getting at that amount of time. So soaker hoses are pretty good for like longevity and more for like annual crops, say a garden, like in your garden scenario, like out in a vegetable garden. Soaker hoses are really nice to be able to use around the plants and use it when they need it, because it's an annual crop that we do every year, and they can be thirstier because they haven't had a lot of time to root. So early in the season, soaker hoses on gardens are certainly a good way to garden. With established shrubs, soaker hoses are not needed in Middle Tennessee. They're simply not. And then around newly planted plants, people think that soaker hoses are just kind of an end-all solution. Like I can just put a soaker hose out there and run it for a little while. A lot of that water that a soaker hose, provides is used up mainly by turf grass. It's not actually getting deep into the soil where you want it. Like I said, it's good for like vegetable gardening because those roots are still fairly atop of the ground because they're still latching in and growing. So a lot of that water gets right to them, and it's good surface kind of water. But for a deep, like big, say you plant a 15 or 25 gallon tree, a pretty big tree, whatever, a soaker hose typically is not all that effective in watering that deeply enough. So good and bad, it kind of depends on the scenario. So like I said, I like to really just know where my water's going right whenever I first plant it and make sure that it's adequately soaked at first.
I recently read that clay soils have an absorption rate of about 1/2 inch every hour. I think that's it. 1/2 inch every hour. So be mindful of that when you need to soak a bigger thing down to like 11 or 12 inches. It's a lot of water, a lot of soaking.
It's a lot. So
we have one other question too.
What up?
Do you need to deadhead a clematis?
That's an interesting question, and I like it. You certainly can. Anytime you want to deadhead, y'all, you certainly can do it. That's just removing its seeds, removing its old flowers. Nothing wrong with that. Specifically, clematis, though, is kind of cool after it blooms, I think. Mine, I've got a clematis right now. Jack Manny Eyes, the specific variety. Probably the best clematis on the market, if you ask me. A big purple blooming fella. But after it blooms, it wants to set seed, and it has these really cool seed heads that are like, they're kind of clear. It's hard to explain. They're kind of clear, but they're kind of almost looks like a spider or something that's coming out. It's just their old reproductive parts that hang on, and usually they hang on by a lot. There's like a lot of them because it blooms so profusely. So, like I said, you can certainly remove those if you want. I leave mine on because I think it just adds for another little show. It's like, these don't have blooms right now, but they've got these cool little seed pods on them that are interesting to look at. So I leave mine on, but certainly okay for you to go ahead and deadhead them. That goes with anything. But yeah, cool question. I like them. I think they're kind of cool. So, all right.
Okay.
We're getting down to the end of this thing, ain't we?
Yes, we are. I think that's all the questions we have. Thank you, by the way, for watching. If you're watching at the At Home Show page, which is a recent streaming destination for us, or the Bates Nursery Facebook page. We appreciate you joining us, as well as our folks on Zoom. We thank you very much. This time, literally a week from today, we will have yet another webinar, and it's called Will It Bouquet with Melissa McKay. So, talking about some unconventional things you might want to consider for putting in flower arrangements. If you cut flower garden, it's a great subject. Tune into that. A week after that, July 28th, Caroline will be in here with growing indoor cactus. So also another one. We're a little bit broad spectrum this July. We're just kind of all over the place, but we thank you for joining us for this one. And Austin, I'll let you take it away.
All right. Well, thank you guys, like Tyler said, for watching. Like I said, this isn't the most fun webinar because you have to do work, but work is the only way to have a really good-looking, successful garden, and there is nothing better than looking out of your garden at night and seeing a tidy, well-kept, good-looking green garden. It's just, there's nothing better than that if you're a gardener. That's what we all achieve or try to achieve, and you have to do that with some maintenance. So get out there and work, use them hands, get in that dirt, and try to prevent some issues before bad things start to happen. So that's what we need to be doing now. So anyway, thanks for watching. We really appreciate it, and y'all have a great day.